What's up? This is Jono from Baron Carta, and this is a commentary on Ratlines. So when I started the writing process for what became In a Concrete Room, I knew I wanted to write a thrash song. You know, I've been a huge fan of thrash since I was 15, listening to bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Overkill, Annihilator, Zentrix, Onslaught, Slayer, all of these wonderful bands. And what I wanted to do with this was to kind of surprise people who'd heard our first release, Step Into the Plague. You know, like if you listen to Out of Time, kind of a heavy mid-tempo song, or Act 1 Duty, which was kind of this big orchestral, heavy, kind of epic, or, you know, whether you listen to Truth to Power, for example, which is kind of a more of a mid-tempo, thrashier kind of song as well. I wanted someone to listen to a song on this second release and be like, holy shit, that's nuts. I was not expecting that. And I want that all of the time with Baron Carta. I don't want anyone to ever just expect the same thing over and over again. But I didn't want to write a typical thrash song. I wanted it to sound like a Baron Carta song. And therefore, I set myself a bit of a goal with no idea how I was going to achieve it. And that was to create a thrash song with an acoustic or a clean section in it, where we have this ferocity at the beginning of the song, and then it kind of dies down into a much more gentle, tenderer, if you will. Tenderer, is that a word? Tenderer? I don't know. Probably not. Section. So you get that light and shade, which I always love in music. So again, no idea I was going to do this, but that was the goal that I kind of set out with. In terms of the subject matter, this song is written about these real world escape routes that were present at the end of World War II, when the Nazis lost the war and they wanted to get out and avoid, prosecution. So that in many cases, the church actually helped them escape and get to countries like parts of the world like South America. And I wanted to tell the story of somebody in that position. So you hear that Hitler's dead. Now you got to get out and kind of save your skin. And what does that frantic journey look like? I didn't want this in any way to glorify any of this. These are evil people. But what I did want to do was to lull the listener for a moment into a false sense of security. So the clean section of the song, which I talked about earlier on, I wanted there to be a sense that this person was starting to feel some guilt. Like this person actually has realized the evil that they've conducted. But then, absolutely not, because the monster starts speaking again, the little devil that's on their shoulder. And it turns out, no, they haven't changed. They're just as evil as they always were. And that was kind of where the tension builds up into the song as well. All right. So let's pop the old earbuds in, have a listen, and I'll waffle on about Ratlines. Also, welcome to my bar. This is my favorite place to be. The happiest place on earth. About 50 bottles of gin here. Although this weekend will probably be 48 bottles of gin. All right. So as I mentioned earlier on, light and shade to me is really important in all of my music. And I didn't want the thrashy parts of the song to just all be the same riff over and over again, because that'd get boring. So what I did is I started at the beginning of the song at this high part of my guitar fretboard, right? And it kind of sounds like 80s thrash. Like I wouldn't blame anyone if they were listening to this and thought it sounded a lot like Slayer. Just this really kind of aggressive, fast playing. But then when the vocals come in a little bit, it's actually going to drop down a little bit lower, to add a little bit more aggression to the vocals as they kind of kick in. So yeah, that sounds a little bit lower as the vocals are kind of kicking in. Now, there's two things to note in this section. One is to do with Morton, who's playing the drums. Some drummers play so tight and they're so on time in their playing that it can sound sterile. And with thrash, you don't want that. You want there to be a sensation that the drums are kind of dragging the guitars and the bass along by the scruff of their neck. It's the drums are the kind of the maniac machine that everything's connected to. Morton does this perfectly. I've played with various thrash drummers in the past where, everything they're doing is right, but it doesn't have that slightly chaotic timing to it. And, I'm not saying that Morton's not in time when it's playing. He's absolutely in the pocket, but you don't want it so perfect that it sounds like a machine's playing the drums. So that's the first thing. But secondly, when it comes to the vocals, what I was hearing in my head when I was writing the music was a fairly monotonal set of vocals. Like there's not a lot of, octave shifts and notes, different notes as Ralph's singing this. It's all pretty much in the same note, but it's the rhythm of it that to me is what kind of pierces through the music and gives it some life. It's actually a technique that a lot of death metal vocalists, who are growling will use. I mean, a brilliant example of this is, Corpse Grinder from Cannibal Corpse. He often doesn't vary a huge amount in the way he growls his lyrics. But there's this phenomenal timbre and timing to it and rhythm to it. And it's almost like his voice box is a rhythm instrument. So what I was hearing in my head was Ralph doing something similar, but obviously he's singing, right? He's not growling.
He said there ain't no time to stone what he should inside. He justified. Set the papers into haters, freedom, clandestine. Our uniforms became the form. We fight preemptive flames, a line of sight into the night. We'll go away.
So there's kind of a lot of like aggressiveness going on here and a lot of vocals crammed in here. I was a little worried when I sent over the lyrics that, this is kind of a lot for Ralph to kind of squeeze in. It's easy for me to kind of hear it in my head and to write the lyrics down and for me to attempt to sing it, but to do it right and to do an actual performance. But unsurprisingly, he completely nailed it. But, at this point in the song, it's like, I don't want to just kind of stay at this level now. And now I want to go back up to that higher level of playing, that higher tonality on the guitar, and just get even more frantic again. Here we go. By the way, specific reference to the word Exodus in that lyric by design, because Exodus are an amazing band. And I think we can credit a lot of thrash metal to, sure, we can credit to the big four, right? Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax. But Exodus, for me, they're an honorary member of the big four. So this is where I now want to go to a different feel, right? Because at this point in the song, which is, I don't know how long this is. I don't have an actual timestamp at this point in my GarageBand, but we've probably been going for a minute and a half, something like that. And I felt like it was time for a change. It was time to take the song somewhere new. Not time, though, yet for the clean bit. So this is where I wanted to go much lower, get into the lower register of the guitar. And what I kept hearing in my head was some pseudo death metal, which might sound a little weird for a Baron Carta song. But one of the things I absolutely love is when you have a lot going on musically, like really fast guitars, like lots of double bass drumming, for example, but instead of it sounding like ba 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 ba, that there's kind of a background rhythm to it where it's kind of like do 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 do. It's kind of like lulling you along like you're on a boat and you're floating along, and it's kind of the rhythm of the boat. So I ended up writing this riff that's kind of inspired a little bit by a band called Decapitated, where they have these really interesting discordant kind of rhythm sections. And then what I wanted to do was to fill that out with a shitload of double bass drumming. And I'm pretty happy with it. It sounds pretty cool. I'll talk about the vocals in a second, but let's play it. I gotta say, I mean, one of the things I love about writing music and making music and sharing it and all the rest of it is I get such a genuine sense of satisfaction when I hear a part of a song that I enjoy listening to as a listener. Like, I mean, I'm obviously biased. I write all of this music, and therefore, you know, I'm by definition writing music that I would want to listen to. But when you listen to it and it gives you that buzz, that to me is the true essence of any art form. Like, if you paint something and you look at it and you're happy with it, or if you make some food and it tastes amazing, you get a thrill from it. And this section is a good example of that. It makes me feel good when I listen to it back. I hope you folks like it as well. But when it comes to the vocals, what I kept hearing in my head here was you got a lot of low register, a lot of low frequency here, the low guitars, the low bass, the low drums, the bass drums. And I wanted to have some of that trademark Ralph Sheepers high-pitched harmonized vocals just piercing through it like a knife going through a cake. I think it sounds killer. So at this point in the song, what I kept hearing in my head, and I can't explain how this works. Like, when I'm writing something and I'm kind of putting all these pieces together, it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. Something will feel like the right thing to do next. And what I knew in my head was I needed to have some guitar solos. And I knew that it couldn't just be a single guitar solo, because I wanted the rhythm behind it to keep moving up and down again. So I knew it needed to be kind of a long, elongated solo section. But what I didn't want it to be was just me playing that, because no matter how much I tried to make these different solos glue together in different ways and sound different and fresh, it's never going to sound as exciting as I ultimately want it to sound. So that's where I knew I needed somebody else to come in and play a solo on it. And that's when I started thinking, well, who else should that be? And that was a decision that lasted approximately 2 seconds, because I knew it was going to be Tom Draper. Tom is this awesome guy, a mutual friend of ours. Rob introduced us. It turns out 2 huge fans of metal living in the same town here in California. He's English. I'm obviously English. We ended up getting together, having a few drinks. And that's when I discovered he's a hell of a shredder, a hell of a player. Plays in an amazing band called Pounder. He also plays with Carcass. So just before the pandemic kicked off, I wasn't seeing him very often because he was constantly playing festivals with Carcass. So I said to him, would you be interested in doing a solo battle, right? I'll play the first solo, you do the second one, I'll do the third one, you do the fourth one. And he was like, dude, of course I would. That'd be awesome. So I sent him over the song on a Saturday at like 1 p.m. And within, I think maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, he had written the 2 solos and he'd sent them to me. And then I just reamped them, which is where I basically take his dry solo, the raw sound from his guitar, and I basically amplify it with the guitar tones that I use in Baron Carta. And he was done. He put this together in a couple of hours, and I think it sounds amazing. And what I love is that it complements what I'm doing. Like, my style is very different to his. So mine's a little bit more slower and I'd say a little bit more measured. And he's got this kind of really frantic, erratic, exciting counterpart to it. And I think it sounds really good. So I'm going to play it and I'll point out who's doing which solo. So this solo that you're already hearing right now is me. All right, so this is when I wanted to start edging towards the clean section. I knew I couldn't go from all of that mania with the solos directly into a clean section, so I needed something to kind of glue it together. And this is when I realized that the bass hasn't really had an opportunity to shine at this point in the song. So what I wanted to do was to write some kind of slow, I don't know what the right word is, these guitar parts in this next section, they kind of like swing from side to side, almost like any parent who's had a baby, right? You kind of swing your baby from side to side, and that's how they go to sleep. I wanted that with the music. So we're kind of taking a little bit more rhythm to it as opposed to this frantic thrash metal. And then I wanted that to have some really fun bass behind it. Then we lead into the clean section. So, at this point, I actually hadn't written the clean section yet. I just knew I needed something that was going to connect to it. So the key thing to listen out for in this section that you might not have heard when you've heard the song previous is the bass guitar. Like, the bass guitar is really intended to add a lot of flavor to this section. So it's not just all guitar and vocals. Particularly this bit of bass guitar. So what I love about Ralph's vocals on this bit as well is that, earlier on in the song when he was just cranking all of those lyrics out, and like I said, it was primarily anchored to this particular note, I guess you could say, or octave primarily. He didn't have a lot of opportunities. There was so much going in to really let his voice breathe. It was very much focused on aggression. And what I love in this section when he sings here is you feel the full 3D width of the Ralph Sheeper's voice. It sounds big and warm and satisfying. And that's what we needed behind some heavy music just before we get into the clean section, where you then hear, again, that big warm voice, because we don't have all of those aggressive guitars behind it.
All my nightmares there are both they seem from here.
So when I was setting myself the goal of writing the clean part here, I started doing what a lot of metal guitarists do and writing these kind of intricate picked sections. And what I'm always trying to do with Baron Carta is catch myself being predictable. Like any musician, I tend to hear something in my head that I think will make sense, and then I'll record it in my project in my studio, and I'll be like, it sounds good, but it doesn't sound exciting. And I did that. I wrote a whole bunch of little clean pieces, and it just sounded predictable to me. And then actually I was having lunch one day, and I just picked up my acoustic guitar and just started strumming, played a completely different song. And I thought, strumming, that's what I need in this section of the song. Who's going to expect this, Jason Mraz style strumming at this point in the song? Nobody's going to expect that. And that's what you get. The key thing also to point out with this section is I wanted to invert the relationship between the guitar and the bass. All too often in music, you've got this kind of it's like a cake. Right at the bottom of the cake, the bass, you've got not the bass guitar, but the base of the cake, like the thick, delicious crust. You've got the drums and the bass. It's the foundation of a song. And then above that, you've typically got guitars. And then on the top, the icing is usually the vocals. The vocals kind of sit in there, and they sit on top of this big, delicious cake. And therefore, the bass is often kind of relegated to an instrument that's really just in kind of utilitarian service of the guitars. And I always like to kind of change that up a little bit. So what I want you to do with this is, with these strumming guitars, is actually have the bass be much higher in the mix. So Jacob yanked the bass up in the mix a little bit to make sure that it was really the forefront. And the way I described it to him in my mix notes was, when you're listening to Ralph singing, I also want you to be like pulled forward by the bass. Like earlier on in the song, the drums were kind of yanking the guitars forward, but the guitars were the big thing that you were listening to. At this point, the drums are taking a step back, the guitars are taking a step back, and the bass is designed to be this big warm wall of noise that's moving this section forward. And I think it sounds pretty cool.
All that's left is the ash of my feet. All the faces, all the smiles, all the futures I never more.
This is the section of the song that I mentioned earlier on, where the character in the song is laid in bed and is starting to feel this guilt. You know, all their faces, all their smiles, you know, all their futures are nevermore. You know, this is the impact, the horror that this person's inflicted on the world. So as you kind of like reading the lyrics or listening to the lyrics of this part of the song, it's tempting to let your empathy take over. But as we get into the heavier section in just a second, because I didn't want to end with this clean section, because I think it would have been ultimately a little bit unsatisfying. I wanted to kind of get back to that almost death metal-y section with the double bass drums. I wanted that to wrap the song. So there needed to be something that connected the clean section to that really aggressive section. And that to me was this devil sat on this dude's shoulder saying, you know what? You know, you're an evil bastard. And that's the way it's going to be. And it's kind of creepy. But I also didn't want, it's important to me lyrically, that I never send the wrong message. And I don't want anyone to be under any illusion that these people are evil. No empathy is deserved of these people.
For my pride, I have no one to blame. Close my eyes, look up high. My redemption is suicide. But this vision will not benefit from the weak.
Here we go. Here's the evil.
Get out of here. You must bring all this fear. Repent to the wall. They offer no life, no.
By the way, just before we get into this next bit, when I sent this over to Jacob to mix, there's a lyric here, war. And he added this vocal effect in it. I think it sounds so cool the way he did it. Check it out.
Use your hate will conquer this war. The Ratlines.
So this bit is the same aggressive death metal style section from earlier on, but with Ralph just really kind of, there's a little bit more effect on his vocals to make it sound a little bit more mendacious and evil. But it's a very similar performance, but he just adds just an extra 10 or 20% of aggression to it because we're coming into the end part of the song. There you have it. That's Ratlines. You know, like I said earlier on, you know, a big chunk of the reason why I wanted to write this song was to be always surprising the listener. You know, look, there's a style to the music that I write in Baron Carta, and I'm hoping people are going to latch onto that style and like it. So not everything is going to be, you know, completely different. But I always want there to be a sense that there's going to be an unpredictability to the music. In the same way that anyone who's watched Game of Thrones, one of the things that people always talk about in Game of Thrones is how you never know when a major character is going to be killed off. Like, they're killing off major characters all of the time. And it makes the show much more anxiety-inducing to watch because no one's safe. And I wanted the same thing with Ratlines to be kind of a bit of a surprising, you know, punch to the spuds when it comes to the music. And, you know, with other songs, there'll be other kind of styles. As far as I'm concerned, if it sounds cool, it goes in. So anyway, that's it. Thank you, my friends, for listening to me waffle on about music. I hope you found this interesting. Be sure to go and check out the new release, In a Concrete Room. It's available everywhere. And I'll talk to you soon. Peace out.